Hi, I want to welcome you to the fifth annual 1455 StoryFest and Writing the Tough Stuff for the Stage or Page, three essential strategies every writer needs to know. My name is Lisa Cooper Ellison. I am a trauma-informed writing coach and author and speaker. And writing the tough stuff is my jam. I have been working with people for over 20 years on teaching them how to take tough stories and turn them into art. And my hope today is to give you some very concrete strategies and tips that you can use to thrive rather than just survive the writing process. And this process is so near and dear to me because not only do I coach other writers, but I'm a writer myself. I'm in the trenches right along with you. And some of the strategies I'm going to teach you today were things that I learned the hard way by doing it wrong. So I want to make sure that you have additional support by learning from my mistakes and also from the wisdom that I have gathered as a former mental health counselor who has studied the confluence of creativity and trauma and tough stories. So we're going to get started now. So let me go ahead and get my slideshow started. All right, here we are. So in this presentation, there are a few things I'm going to cover. I'm going to go over some definitions because some of you may be brand new to writing while others are seasoned writers, and I want to make sure we're all speaking the same language. And once we establish that language, we're going to work on three things: cultivating the right mindset, picking the right event to tell your story about, and crafting the right story. So those are the three things that we're going to work on, and there will be specific strategies and concrete steps you can take in all three parts. So let's begin with the terms. So here are a few terms I'm going to use throughout this presentation. Some of you may be performers while others are writers, and so for the sake of this presentation, anybody who's telling a story is a storyteller. And whether people are receiving your story as a member of an audience or they're reading your book, we're going to call them the audience. And a story is a journey where a character who has a problem gets solved, and as a result of solving this problem, they transform. I like to share this definition because many of us start feeling called to write something really tough because we've had something very powerful happen to us. But when you're telling a story, it isn't enough to just really share what happened. We need to share what it means, and the way we do that is by sharing that arc of transformation. Now, a tough story is that journey of transformation, but this is one that has a lot of emotional charge. So it's going to have an emotional charge for you as the person working on it, and it's going to have some sort of charge for your audience. And the charge within each audience member is going to be dependent upon how many tough stories they're carrying. So we want to make sure that we are really creating a process that holds space for all of that experience inside you and also inside each one of your audience members. Now, I want to talk a little bit about trauma before we get started. So trauma is a response. It's a psychological, emotional, and physiological response. That means it happens in your thoughts, in your feelings, and in your nervous system to a perceived threat of harm or loss of life. So you may actually have gone through something where you thought you were going to die, or maybe you just felt like you were going to die. Either way, that experience can be translated as trauma in the body. And that's because trauma lives in the body. It does not necessarily live in the brain. And it is the kind of story that can feel very scattered. It may not have a lot of language around it. So it can be more difficult to tell. And there are two components that are going to be there. One, this is an unintegrated story. It's something that you do not know what it means. And one of the reasons why it's not integrated is because it has disturbed your worldview. Now, we all live with a specific kind of worldview in order to be part of society. And we all live with this in a good enough way. We do not have a perfect sense of this, but we all have a good enough way. And there are three components to that worldview. The world is safe. I can predict what's going to happen, and I know how people are going to operate. So those are the things that we feel like we are agreeing upon in order to function in society. But when we go through a traumatic event, that gets disrupted and in many ways shattered. And so part of the journey of healing and recovery is to regain some sense of that worldview so that you can operate in a way that is affirming for yourself. But here's something that's really, really important to understand. Just because you went through a tough thing does not mean that it is trauma that lives in your body or in your brain. You can go through many, many tough things that may be a trauma for someone else, but they will not necessarily be a trauma for you. So you don't have to label something as traumatic if it doesn't feel that way. Even if other people go, wow, that was a huge trauma, it doesn't have to be a trauma for you. So now that we've talked about those definitions, let's just look at this list of situations that may inspire a tough story. You know, tough stories often call or beg to be told. And this is just a short list of some of the kinds of experiences you may have that call for you to tell a tough story about. This is certainly not a comprehensive list, but it gives you a sense of some of the things that you may go through. Could be a loss, maybe there was like an experience of violence, a mental health crisis, environmental catastrophe. It could be any one of these things or many others. And those are the experiences you have, and then you turn that experience into a story that has some sort of meaning. And the way we do that is by creating some sort of container. So let's just use loss as an example. Maybe you have a horrific loss and you lose absolutely everything. Nothing is the same about your life, and you have to rebuild your life. That might be a rising from the ashes story. Maybe this loss has taken you to a place where you don't know how anything works anymore. And so you have to go into the unknown and figure out how life works again. Or maybe someone caused this terrible death and you want to bring them to justice, and that might be conquering the enemy. Having some sort of framework like this for the type of story that you're telling can help you begin that meaning-making process. And so, you know, there is a workbook that goes along with this presentation that you can download. And I have listed all of these, and there are many other kinds of stories that you could tell, but having a sense of what that story is the beginning to building the container of meaning that will help both you and your audience. So, you know, even though you may have a container, it can still be hard to tell this tough story. And there are a few different reasons why it's difficult to tell these stories. It all boils down to being seen. So for many of us who have carried tough stories, and I am certainly one of those people, you know, our nervous systems might see being seen as really dangerous. We have this experience of not safe when that happens. And that's because when we were younger and going through really tough stuff, we were either bad things happened to us when we were seen, or maybe we went through something really painful and no one saw. So either way, it can feel really dangerous. And so, you know, first coming to the page and beginning to bear witness to your story, that's a form of being seen. That can feel really dangerous. Or when you go to publish or perform, that can feel really dangerous because your nervous system just sees that something bad could happen. And so what we don't want to do is overwhelm the nervous system by taking something that feels dangerous and pushing ourselves to do it when we're not ready. So we don't want to overwhelm our nervous system, and that can happen if something feels really dangerous and we don't attend to those feelings. So that's about, you know, a fear of a bad thing happening. But there's another reason why it can be really tough to tell this story. You know, many of our tough stories include a lot of really powerful emotions, and we may or may not have attended to those emotions. And so when you begin to bear witness to that experience on the page, or when you are sharing this either in a publication or as a performance, you may have a lot of feelings come up because now people are seeing you. And being seen is a very powerful experience, and it is a huge part of the healing process. So the fact that you're having this tsunami of feelings or emotions is not necessarily a bad thing, but you want to be sure to attend to them both through the writing process and also in a good enough fashion before you get to the publication or performance stage of the process, so that at that point the emotions aren't too much. So one of the ways that you're going to make sure that you attend to this is by having some tools in your tool belt that help you cultivate the right mindset. So that's what we're going to do now. And I want to let you know that cultivating the right mindset is all about accessing your wisdom. So what do I mean by that? And how do you access your internal wisdom? So your body is an incredibly powerful tool of wisdom. We often think of wisdom coming from our brains, and yeah, our brain can help us, but your body is a lot wiser. But for many of us who carry tough stories, we have come to a place where we ignore our bodies and the signals that we have. And sometimes we ignore what's going on outside of us because we don't want it to get in the way of what we're trying to get done. And yet, when we ignore these things, we make bad choices. So when you're trying to activate your internal wisdom, you are trying to pay attention to what's happening both inside of yourself and in your surroundings, which can include your schedule, the people who need things from you, things happening in your job. You're going to attend to all of this so you can make really good creative judgments. To do this, you have to be present, which can be really hard for many of us. And so your whole goal in activating your internal wisdom is to have your head and your butt in the same moment. And so that's what all of these skills are going to be around cultivating. And here's why it's really important for you to begin to do this. We all have an energy bank account. And a sub account in this total energy bank account is our creativity account. And there are lots of forms of creativity and writing that we do that absolutely fill us up. They make us feel energized and alive and excited. Here's the thing. Tough stories don't always make us feel that way. In fact, tough stories, when we're writing them and when we're performing them or publishing them, are actually going to take away from that energy bank account. So you have to make sure that you have enough energy in advance to do this work. That's how you thrive rather than just survive this writing process. The other thing you want to watch out for is that working on a tough story is going to put you in touch with some really powerful emotions, and that can be dysregulating. And when I say dysregulating, I just mean that your nervous system is going to have a reaction. So you might feel anxious, you might feel powerfully sad, you might get in touch with some fear or anger. You may have a physical response. Maybe your throat closes up a little bit, or your heart races, or your stomach feels a little sick when you're doing some of this writing. This is not necessarily a bad thing. This is actually the trauma moving through your body, if this is trauma, or it could be just the rest of the story moving through you because you're feeling the feelings you didn't feel before. But because this can be dysregulating, what happens is that our head stops being in the same moment as our butts. And so we end up getting really far away from our stories. And so we may need some help getting back to the present moment. So I want to give you some very specific strategies that can help you do this. So the first one is morning pages. So morning pages is something that Julia Cameron talks about in her book, The Artist Way. And she talks about it in a very specific way. So if you are going to be true to her format, you would get up first thing in the morning and you would start writing, and you would write 3 pages. And she has some very good reasons why she wants you to write at that time of day. When you first wake up, your brain is still in this delta wave state, which is kind of the dream state. And it will rise into an alpha brainwave state, but these states are not problem solving states, and your thinking is a little bit looser. So what you write down is going to be a little more associative. You might get to things that are truer because you're not going to filter or self edit. And there is a kind of writing you can do at that time of the morning that you will not do at other times of the day. So she has some great reasons for doing this. However, what I will say in terms of accessing wisdom, just doing it, whether it's morning pages, late morning pages, afternoon pages, or evening pages, can be helpful in terms of accessing your wisdom. You're just going to do this writing, and you're writing 3 pages so that you're writing long enough that you're getting out of your own way, and all of those unconscious thoughts are coming out. So you're just going to be writing stream of consciousness. And then you're going to be paying attention along the way as to what you're actually saying to yourself. Are you starting every single one of these with, I'm really tired? That's probably a signal that you need more rest. Are you always complaining about the same issue? Are you angry with your boss or your partner, or are feeling really stressed out about something going on with your kids? If that's the case, then it's likely you have things you need to attend to in order to be ready to do this work. So this can be a way to think about that and to work through some of those issues. But if you're like, I don't want to write, or I want an extra tool, another thing you can try is mindfulness-based meditation. Mindfulness-based meditation was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn. This is a non-religious form of meditation, though I always acknowledge that all meditation comes from Eastern philosophies. But this is a non-religious version whose sole purpose is to help you attend to the present moment. So it's to pay attention to the present moment without judgment. And what's important to know about this is that it's not about making the present moment better. It's just about accepting whatever it is. So if this is a really rotten present moment, you're just going to sit with the fact that it feels rotten and learn how to accept it. And if it's a great present moment, you're going to be attending to it being great. It doesn't really matter what it is. You're just trying to be with it. This is really important because many people think that if they meditate, it's going to make their lives better. And, you will build some resilience if you are meditating. You will learn how to engage the relaxation response in your body. However, it's not necessarily going to improve your circumstances. It's going to give you some resources and tools to be able to accept it. So that's one thing you want to know about mindfulness-based meditation. The Insight Timer app has some great meditations that you can use. This is a free app that you can download onto your phone. And there are lots and lots of different kinds of meditations you can try. Some are very short, some are very long. And, something you can experiment with. And I have some meditations on there that are specific for writers. Here's something I would say if you know you're a person who has experienced trauma. There are times when meditation is not a good idea for people who've experienced trauma. So meditation often gets you in touch with your body. If a lot of bad things have happened to your body, attending to it may feel really unsafe for your nervous system. So you want to make sure that if you are trying this for the first time, that you're trying short meditations, that you are doing guided meditations, and that you are not necessarily doing meditations where the focus is so deeply on the body. So these are just some things to think about as you consider this as an option. However, if you're like, I already know I hate meditation, or I don't want to try it, I also have an inquiry process that you can go through that is in your workbook. And it is a way to go through a more logic-driven assessment of what's going on, what you want, how you're feeling about it, and what might be the next right steps. So I wanted to give you another way to systematically think through things so that you have many different ways of accessing your wisdom. And however, I want to let you know that one way that you are also going to be accessing your wisdom is through the drafting and revision process. Working on your story is going to tell you a lot about what's going on inside you, how this story is affecting you physically, mentally, emotionally, and how you make sense of the world. So there is a form of wisdom that will come from this process, and then you aid that by adding in these other options. But just having some ways to access wisdom is probably not enough. That's because, as I said in an earlier slide, working on tough stories can be dysregulating. You're going to have times where your head and your butt are not going to be in the same moment, and you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get yourself back there. Also, you may decide, you know what, I'd like a little extra something something before I start working on the toughest of stories, or maybe I'd like some tips for preparing to perform or for publication. So these 5 options here are very specific things you can do to self-soothe and perform triage if you know that you're triggered, or if you want to ground yourself before difficult writing or you are working on a performance. So the first one is breath work. So breath work is a structured breathing exercise that you do so that you engage your parasympathetic nervous system. So your nervous system has 2 parts. It has the sympathetic nervous system, which is the part that controls fight, flight, or freeze. And if you have a lot of tough stories in your life, it's possible that that part is really strong. And so for some of us, it's on pretty much all the time. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part that handles relaxation and calm. And for some of us, that part is a little weaker. When you practice breathwork exercises, you are strengthening the parasympathetic nervous system and helping it work better. You're also accessing it. And so I'm going to give you 3 different breathwork exercises you can do, and we're going to practice one right now so you have an opportunity to see what it feels like to do this. So the breathwork exercise that we're going to do is 4 square breathing. We're going to inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, and hold for a count of 4. Now I'm going to lead you through this, and what I want you to do is count 1, 2, 3, 4 in your brain while we're doing this. And there's a very specific reason why we do it, which I'll explain afterwards. So let's inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, and hold for a count of 4. And I hope that just doing that one time, you notice that you're feeling a little more relaxed. Now, the reason why I have you count while you're doing this is because if you're counting, you can't be thinking about other things. It is a way to create a sense of relaxation in the brain, which will help increase that sense of ease and calm inside you. Another exercise you can do is the Soles of the Feet meditation. This is a meditation that I learned from Kristen Neff. She is a self-compassion researcher. She does a lot of great work in this area. She has a fabulous website, which I give you access to. And this is a moving meditation. So you are actually standing, though you could certainly do this meditation sitting down, but you are focusing on what's happening on the soles of your feet as you do some very gentle movements. And so if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to give meditation a try, but I also know I have this trauma history, this can be a great meditation for you to try because it is very grounding. And I've done this with many different groups of people, including trauma survivors, and everyone has found this to be very helpful. This is a variation of the last one, which is called walking barefoot on the grass. We call that grounding. So when you make a connection between your feet and the ground, you access the present moment and that calming part of your nervous system. So, those are some physical ways that you can engage that calming part of your nervous system and create some triage that keeps your head and your butt in the same moment. However, I want to give you two mental options too. So, one thing you can do is if you're having a really powerful experience, you can name your feelings. So, if you have a really powerful experience, just saying like fear, 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 or anger, anger, anger. It doesn't matter even that you get it right, it's that you give it language. And that's because feelings exist in this lizard part of the brain called the limbic system. And when you create language around it, you engage that prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain, and that helps lower the intensity of that feeling. This is something I also learned from Kristen Neff when I did a training with her. And another option that you have is to name things outside of your body. I often have people do this while looking to the left or right. So you might look to the right and name three things, then look straight ahead and name three things, and then look to the left and name three things. And in doing that, moving your eyes back and forth, left to right, you are allowing the left and right hemispheres of the brain to communicate. And by naming things, you are forcing yourself to be in the present moment. Both of those things can be very grounding and helpful if you are feeling a lot of intense emotions or if you're feeling exceptionally triggered. So now that you have some strategies, and I often invite people to work on these strategies for a little bit before you start working on a tough story. But if you're like, Lisa, I already started working on my tough story and I'm here because, it's been difficult, just add these practices to what you're doing. So you don't have to stop working on your tough story, but add this in so that you can build your wisdom as you continue to work. Because what you want to work on next is identifying the right event. And the right event is going to have some very specific ingredients. One, it's going to be the right level of intensity for you and for your audience. You're going to have a really clear motivation as to why you want to do it. And at the end, that motivation is going to be all about your audience. And this is going to be a story that is ready to be fully cooked. And that will happen when you attend to the first two. So let's talk about that level of intensity. Of the things that I teach people, this is probably going to be the most empowering and the most important for you to learn. So when I'm working with people on a tough story, whether that's a short tough story or they're working on a book which includes many forms of the tough story, I tell people rate the intensity of that experience on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is like a fly going by and 10 is the worst thing that ever happened to you. And it's not so much about the experience, it's about how that experience feels inside you. So along that continuum, we might think about it this way in terms of tough stories. 1 to 3, everyday stuff, kind of the minor ups and downs, probably is not going to make the best story. A 4 to 6, we're getting into the tough stuff. This is the stuff that challenges us. We've got to persevere. We've got to keep going. We might have to face some hard truths. We have some feelings around this, and we probably in the beginning don't even know what it means. And that's why we want to tell the stories, because we're trying to figure that out. The really tough stuff is in the 7 to 8 range. And this is where we're dealing with stuff that really tests our grit. It really affects our worldview, and we have really powerful emotions around it. 9 and 10 is definitely trauma that has imprinted on our nervous system. And when we try to work on it, we're probably going to have a really strong physical reaction to it. And so this is the continuum that I have people rate their work on. And what I tell people is that anything above an 8 belongs in therapy first. And here's the reason why. The toughest stuff that happens to us often happens to us alone. Either we are actually alone when it happens, or we feel very alone because no one is attending to our pain. If that has been your experience, and then you go try to white knuckle your way through a bunch of drafts, you are recreating the circumstances in which your tough stuff or trauma happened, which can reactivate that trauma in your body. And you don't want to do that. You deserve to have a skilled person walk with you through that experience, bear witness to your experience, and help you make meaning from it. So, one thing that people will say to me is like, but Lisa, what if the story that I'm called to tell is a 9 or a 10? Does that mean I can never tell it? Absolutely not. What happens when you work on things in therapy is that the charge goes down. And so something that is a 9 or 10 originally is going to go down to maybe a 4 to a 7 or 8. And I'll give you a personal example. The memoir that I have written, which is on submission, is about my brother's suicide. Now, at one point in my life, my brother's suicide was the worst thing that ever happened. It felt like the worst thing in my body. But as I have healed over time, that intensity has gone down. Now, is it ever going to be a 1? Absolutely not. It's the really tough stuff. So it's supposed to have a lot of emotions around it. But the level of emotions that I feel around this experience are always within that 4 to 7 range. Yeah, sometimes I cry when I'm working on things, or I feel, really sad, or I have to really feel that heartache. But it's never so bad that I want to get up, walk away, throw up, or quit writing. Those are the things you want to watch out for. And the more you empower yourself by saying, like, I know the intensity of this experience, and so I know what I need to do to care for myself through it, the more you become the hero of your journey because you have empowered yourself. So you really want to make sure you do that. And another way that I try to talk about this is the tea kettle experience. Really tough stuff in that 8 to 10 range often feels like we're boiling a kettle boiling over, right? All the water is coming out of us when we have those powerful emotional experiences. But that doesn't serve the writing process, nor does it serve your audience. So as the storyteller, you want to tell things a little at a time, and you want to offer the level of details that allows everybody to feel the story's heat. So we're going to be with the emotions. We're not running away from stuff, but the emotions are not so high, it feels like a story that's boiling over. Because here's what your audience is there for. They are not there for the really intense emotions. They want to know how to cope and how to have hope if they've been in the same circumstances. And so when you can keep the emotional intensity within that range, you're going to be able to transmit these other things, which are the reason why your audience is there. So that's one of the most important things you want to do. And then you want to understand the storytelling process. So there are lots of ways that I break down storytelling, but for the sake of this presentation, I've broken it into 2 parts: drafting and crafting. In the drafting stage, this is the shitty first draft, your hot mess of pages, through the first few drafts of your project. This is where you're focusing on what happened and how you felt, what Vivian Gornick calls the situation. And you're doing this to bear witness to your personal experience. You're trying to sort through those feelings. You're trying to create some logic around this. You're trying to feel like it makes sense to you. And this is an important part of the writing and drafting process. So this isn't something to be skipped. You need to do this work. However, it's just the early stage. Then you're going to craft or cook your story. So a fully cooked story has a clear sense of transformation and meaning. And we begin that work when we have something that feels like it's ready to be workshopped or shared with a critique group. And that goes on till your final draft. And the work that you're doing there is trying to communicate the experience's meaning. You're trying to really understand that transformation, communicate it in the best possible way. Tell the story in a way that is so personal, so specific, so filled with those things that we all think, but we never say, that when your audience hears or reads it, they go, ah, yes, that's my experience. You're speaking my language. You know how I feel. And so then they are able to really get that transformation and understand how this is going to help them cope and how that's going to give them hope. And they do that vicariously by living through your experience. And this is important because we often come to these stories because they're very powerful to us and we care very deeply about what happened to us in our experience. But your audience does not care about that. Your audience cares about their own experiences. And so, what your final story must do is it needs to be a mirror for your audience's soul. That's how they have that me too, aha, yes, you're speaking my language experience. And you do that through the personal and very specific details that you offer in a story of transformation. So it's all about that meaning making and the specificity of your experience, but it's about the audience also. And so that's where you're going. But here's what we often do when we are, beginning to tell a tough story. And I have people come to me all the time who say this, you know what, I have this really powerful story to tell where I've learned things and I don't want anyone else to suffer what I suffered with. I want to help other people. And you know what? I want justice to happen. We need to make sure this never happens to anyone again. I want to right some wrongs and I want to be an agent of change. These are all wonderful and important reasons for telling a story. However, here's an important thing to know. That's stage 2 work. That's the work you do in crafting, and it cannot be done until you attend to the stage 1 work, which is bearing witness to your own experience. And again, you need to understand what happened and you need to make some sense of it. You need to heal and deal with the feelings you have around it so that you can empower yourself to be the hero of your story and you can settle the questions rolling around in your heart. That settling of the questions is going to happen throughout this process. It's not something that, we're suddenly going to get to that point and then we can start the story. That happens throughout, but you really want to attend to the stage 1 work so that you can begin to think of your audience. So I have this litmus test for beginning to recognize where you are in this drafting process and when your story is ready for an audience. And this comes from something that I did with Megan Daum. So I was in a workshop with her a few years back, and she talked about the difference between confessing and confiding when it comes to memoir. So confessing is where we're really focused on what happened, and there's a part of us that is thinking, I need you to know what happened to me. And we're hoping for a reaction from our audience. We want and need our audience to say, that's unacceptable. How dare them? Are you okay? That's horrific. And so that's all about the storyteller's needs. And this isn't bad. It's just that a lot of this stuff is really unconscious. But so we may not even hear ourselves thinking these things, but we will feel tension in our body, especially when it comes time to tell the story to others, because we may wonder, like, will they believe me? Are they going to get it? Have I given them enough to really help them understand what happened? And this is the stuff that we often wrestle with in the drafting stage. So in the drafting stage, your work is not yet ready for an audience, meaning it's not finished. That doesn't mean you can't share it with a critique group, but some of the work there you still may want to do with a therapist before you get ready for a critique group, because a critique group cannot bear witness to your experience and help you make meaning in the ways you may need to if you are writing about trauma. When you're confiding, on the other hand, you know what the story is. Sure, you may feel nervous if you're getting ready to share this story with an audience, if you're going to be performing, but there's also this part of you that feels calm, like, I know what this story is about. I know what the wisdom is. I know the lesson learned. And I know that when I share this, it becomes their story. It's not mine anymore, right? Because a finished story is for the reader or the audience. It's not for you. And so this is the work that happens in crafting, and the right story for your audience. This is, when I say right story, I mean story that is ready to be shared with an audience, confides in the reader. So that's where you're going. That's what you have to make sure that you're doing in order to really allow your tough story to do the right kind of work out in the world. And so that brings us to the last part, which is, how do you craft that kind of story? Okay, so yeah, we're gonna prep, we're gonna cook, we're gonna draft, we're gonna craft. but what does the story look like? And can you give me some parameters around how I can do that meaning making? And I'm going to give that to you now. So I want to begin by talking about the tough stuff writing process. There are 3 beats or 3 things that are going to happen as you're working on this. First, you're going to say, this is what happened to me. You're going to go through that confession stage. Then you're going to get to a place where you say, this is how I understand it. That's that meaning making, that's that crafting, that's that cooking. And when it's finally finished, you're going to say, this is how I let it go. Something that can help you do that in the beginning is building psychic distance. So psychic distance is the distance you have as a storyteller from the story. And it's also what the audience has. The more details you offer and the closer your point of view, the closer the story is and the more intense the feelings are going to be. Sometimes that's not a great place to start. So you want to do some things that allow you to dip your toe in the pool of intensity and then, get into deeper and deeper water over time versus jumping off the diving board and then figuring out if you can swim. So here are 3 strategies you can use that can help you do this. Number 1, instead of thinking about the final version, like I'm going to write a book or I'm going to do a 20-minute moth story, start with something small. I'm going to tell the 1-minute version of the story, and then I'm going to turn to the 5-minute, and then I can think about these longer limits. Or in terms of word count, I'm going to do the 6-word version of the story, and then maybe the paragraph long version, and then maybe the chapter long, and then maybe the book. The reason why this works is that the shorter the story, the fewer details you can have. And that keeps you from getting lost or drowning in the misery of the story. So limits can help you only experience a smaller level of that intensity, and then you can deepen over time. You can also change the point of view or only tell certain parts, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. If we think of point of view like a movie, first person is the actor in the movie. Things are happening to them. Second person is the person, sitting in the seats watching the movie, and so they're seeing it, but they're a little distance. It's not happening to them. Third person is the movie's director. They have a lot of control around it. If you are writing a tough story and you know that the intensity is high, try writing it first from the third person point of view. And then once you've done that, you can see if you want to move up to second person or first, because you will get greater access to what this means the farther away it is. And then you can make that come to life in the point of view that is most important to your story. But you may decide that you want to keep it in third person. Laura Lillibridge, her book Girlish, is written in the third person, and that's a memoir. And she is listed as girl in the story. And when I first heard that, I thought, I don't know how that's going to work, but it actually works really well. And I have listed this in your workbook. So if you want to take a look at that memoir, you could certainly do that. So changing points of view as a way to get distance and understand meaning can be one of the most important things you can do to help you understand your story. Another thing you can do is only tell the part that counts. You do not have to tell everything to the reader, even though there may be times when you have to tell it to yourself. So this is an excerpt from Tracy Strauss's essay, Leaving My Abusive World, which deals with sexual abuse. I've given you the essay from Poets and Writers that discusses the strategy, along with several other strategies that can help you write about trauma. So in this one, this is the 2 paragraphs that she shares. I sat next to my father on his side of the bed he and my mother shared, beside the mahogany bureau where the checkbooks were located. As I stared at the scratched gold-colored handle of the closed drawer, my father bent forward, leaning his tanned arms across his thigh and folding his hands between his knees. He said he'd dispense the funds, but I had to give him something in exchange. I agreed. Now notice, we do not have any details about this sexual abuse. We just have space between this long paragraph and a short one. And if we want to, we can imagine or intuit what happens in between. Sometimes writing this way and only sharing the details that count give your audience permission to imagine or not imagine based on their needs. So this can be a really helpful technique, and it can also give you the freedom and permission to not have to share everything, which can be really affirming and empowering. So I wanted to share this as one of the many strategies that you could use. Another thing I want to do now is just give you a framework for how you could work on a tough story. There are certainly many ways to do this, but I found that having something this systematic can really help tame a tough story, which can many times feel out of control. So this is taken from Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting you'll ever need by Blake Schneider. In chapter 4 of his book, he has this beat sheet. And a beat sheet is a treatment you would use with a screenplay, which is for a movie. But this treatment works for all kinds of different stories because it identifies the beats or the turning points within your story and then shows how they work together to create meaning and that story of transformation. So a beat is just a turning point, and it's going to include an external event. Something's going to happen out there. That's the plot. And it's going to create some sort of internal change. And so when you're working on the beat sheet, Blake Schneider doesn't tell you to do this, but I'm telling you to do this. I want you to start at the end. I want you to identify the lessons you've learned, the big changes, how you are different, the wisdom you have, and then identify a scene that represents that change or answer. You want to land on an action. Actions are very powerful ways to end something. You certainly could end in a different way, but I always tell people action. And you want to show rather than tell as you're doing this. And here's the reason why I say start at the end, especially with a tough story. It grounds you as a storyteller because you're not going to get caught in the swamp of misery. Instead, you're going to focus on the victory that's at the end. And so you're going to know where you're headed. You're not going to meander as much as you're going to be thinking like, okay, I know what the victory is. What are the steps that get me there? Rather than getting lost in maybe some of the other tough stories that also were happening simultaneously. So when you know where you're headed, that can give you a sense of focus that helps you see yourself as the hero and empowers you to create a really clear journey. And once you know that ending, go back to the beginning and identify the scene that shows the opposite of your answer. This is going to be a point when problems are happening and your narrator doesn't know that the problems exist. And this is going to be a scene or a set of scenes that set up the problem, like what does it look like, any misperceptions or faulty ways of thinking that your narrator has. We're going to know what they want, and we're going to know the stakes of not getting it. So you're going to develop these things through a series of scenes or one scene. And I will tell you that if you have a trauma history or you have been carrying a lot of tough stories in your life, you may have this overwhelming urge to go back to age 2 and start there because that was the origins of your original injury. But if you are telling a story from adulthood, you want to start in adulthood. So think about maybe the time in adulthood when you didn't yet know there was a problem, but it existed, and that's where you want to start. So if you're just in the beginning of the drafting process, come up with a good enough answer and go through this process and know that you'll refine this over time. Once you know your beginning and your ending, you're going to create the breadcrumb trail of your story, which is the beats that get you from the beginning to the end and that work together to tell a story. So there's going to come that point where, your narrator has a problem, they don't even know, but then something's going to happen that says, hey, you've got a problem. That would be the catalyst. And then they're going to wonder, do I do something about it? Do I not? Maybe it's okay. But then they're going to figure out, you know what? I can't live like this anymore. That's the break into, and that's when they commit to the journey of changing. As they're going through this change process, they're going to want something. And then at the midpoint, they're going to have to say, do I still want this? Or maybe do I want or need something else? And they're going to decide either double down on what you want or shift gears and go after something else. But then obstacles are going to continue to happen because stories are about obstacles. And, they're going to get to a point where they can't see a way forward. And when they can't see the way forward, that's the all hope is lost. And then they're going to have to reckon with the possibility of failure. What if they can't see through? What if they're going to, the thing they feared this whole time is going to happen? And that's the dark night of the soul. But they will find a way out. and then they will figure out their story's resolution. And that's where you live out that answer or solution. So, as I said, in your workbook, you will have all of this information so that you can see how Blake Schneider uses this. But I wanted to give you some sort of framework or system that you could use to begin to tell your story. And then once you've done it this way, you can see if you want to do it another way. So that's it for this presentation. I am so grateful that you attended today. I want to remind you that you can download your workbook, which has additional information about this topic. It has all of the exercises and the things that I referenced. And I also invite you to sign up for my Writing Your Resilience newsletter. This is a free newsletter, and it will give you lots of additional opportunities to both learn and practice different ways to thrive rather than just survive the writing process, especially if you are working on a tough story. And so that is it for today. Thank you again. Thank you so much for coming today. And thank you for attending this year's 1445 StoryFest. Be sure to check out all of the other presentations. There is so much wisdom here. Please take advantage of all of it. And I hope to keep this conversation going with you through my newsletter. Please do stay in touch. And thank you very much.